I never thought one decision could unravel everything. It was supposed to be harmless, a simple getaway to clear my head, something to escape the routine of everyday life. But as I stood there, the cool ocean breeze against my skin, I realized I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I had lied to my boyfriend, the one person who trusted me completely, and I did it for someone I swore I was over. The trip with my ex was meant to be nothing more than closure, a moment to find peace with the past. What I didn't expect was that my return home would greet me with a shocking surprise. He was waiting for me, my boyfriend. And I could see it in his eyes. He knew. He knew everything. The question was, what was he going to do about it? My name is Sarah, and for the most part, I've always prided myself on being honest and loyal. But I guess, like anyone, I have my flaws. My boyfriend, James, is everything I thought I wanted, caring, reliable, and deeply invested in our relationship. We've been together for 2 years, and he's the kind of person who always makes me feel safe. He's the one who texts me every morning, who plans surprises just because, and who can always make me laugh, even on the hardest days. I've never doubted that he loved me, and I think he believed I loved him just as much. James is steady. He's the guy who doesn't waver, the kind of person who values stability and consistency. I'd call him predictable, in a good way. He's the person I'd come home to after a tough day and find comfort in his smile. Our relationship, while not perfect, had become my comfort zone. I was happy, or at least I told myself I was. But as time went on, I started to feel a pull in another direction. Maybe it was the monotony that creeps into any long-term relationship. The endless routine. The same conversations. The same quiet evenings together, with nothing exciting to shake things up. Somewhere along the way, I found myself daydreaming of something more unpredictable, more exciting. I didn't want to lose James, but I didn't want to be stuck in a loop, either. And that's when Ethan reappeared. Ethan was my ex from a few years ago. We shared a fiery, passionate relationship, one that I would never forget. It was intense, full of highs and lows, and maybe in some ways we weren't right for each other, but we had something undeniable. When things ended, I moved on, or so I thought. I told myself I was over him. But when he messaged me out of the blue, suggesting we catch up, I couldn't ignore the feeling that maybe there was still something between us. I had no intention of getting involved with him again, but the temptation was there. He was charming, confident, and that old spark was still there, even after all this time. So when he invited me to go on a spontaneous trip to the coast, I told myself it was harmless. A few days away to clear my head. No big deal. I didn't tell James the full truth. I told him I just needed some time alone to recharge. But deep down, I knew I was lying to him, and to myself. I didn't think it would matter. I told myself it was just a few days of escaping my routine. What I didn't realize was that this trip would change everything. When I came back, James would be waiting for me. And the surprise he had for me would make me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship. It all started with a text from Ethan. Just a simple, "Hey, I was thinking about you. Want to catch up?" At first, I brushed it off. It had been years since we last spoke, and we had both moved on with our lives, or so I thought. But there was something about his message that stirred something inside of me, something I didn't even realize was there anymore. I could still remember the way his laugh would echo in my ears, the way his presence had always felt like a force of nature. Ethan had always had this magnetic pull, this energy that made everything feel alive, even when it wasn't healthy for either of us. It's funny how things work out sometimes. The more I tried to dismiss his message, the more I thought about it. I found myself replaying our past in my head, how we'd met, how we'd fallen for each other with such intensity that it was impossible to breathe without thinking of the other person. I remember feeling so alive back then, caught up in the chaos of it all. But I also remember the way things fell apart, how the passion turned to tension, how the fights became more frequent, how I'd walked away when it all became too much. Yet here I was, months later, staring at my phone with a text that pulled me back into the past. I was torn. Part of me knew I had moved on, part of me knew I was committed to James and didn't want to hurt him, but there was this lingering curiosity. What would it be like to see Ethan again? Would it be just a nostalgic catch-up, or would something else stir up between us? I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal. I told James the first needed some time alone, that I felt a little burnt out and needed to recharge. He was always so understanding, always so supportive of my need for space. I didn't think anything of it when I packed my bags and left. I told myself it was a break for myself, a quick getaway. After all, I wasn't doing anything wrong, right? But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being dishonest. I wasn't telling James the whole truth. It wasn't just a solo trip for self-care. It was a trip to meet up with someone who had once meant so much to me. Ethan had insisted it was just a friendly reunion, but I knew deep down that there was more to it than that. When I arrived at the coast, Ethan was there waiting for me, as charming as ever, and I couldn't deny the rush of excitement that hit me. We spent the weekend laughing, talking, and reminiscing about the good old days. I tried to keep things casual, reminding myself that it was harmless. Just catching up, right? But things quickly escalated. The chemistry was undeniable, and the longer we spent together, the harder it became to separate ourselves from the past. One night, while we were walking along the beach, Ethan kissed me. And in that moment, it was like everything I had been trying to suppress came rushing back. The passion, the heat, the undeniable connection. I pulled away, instantly filled with guilt. I knew I had made a mistake, but I couldn't stop myself from being drawn to him. We didn't go all the way, but the kiss felt like a betrayal. A moment of weakness, one that I couldn't undo. The guilt hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew I wasn't just hurting James, I was betraying myself. But at the same time, there was a part of me that felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. Ethan had always been like that for me, a reminder of what excitement felt like, what it felt like to be wanted, to be adored. I left the coast feeling conflicted. The whole experience had been so intense and emotional, and the guilt had been eating me alive. But what bothered me more was the realization that I wasn't as over Ethan as I had convinced myself. I had lied to James about the trip, and now I was lying to myself about what had happened with Ethan. The worst part? I didn't know how to go back to my relationship with James after all of this. When I returned home, the weight of what I had done hung over me like a dark cloud. I thought I could move past it, pretend it didn't matter, but there was no escaping the truth. James was waiting for me, as if nothing had changed. He had no idea what had transpired, but I could feel his presence, his steady, unwavering love for me, and it made me feel even worse. I had no idea what to say, what to do. Would he be able to tell something was different? Would I ever be able to look him in the eye without feeling like a liar? But that's when it happened, the shocking surprise that James had been holding on to. It wasn't the welcome home I had expected. The days after I returned from my trip were unsettling, to say the least. The feeling of guilt was like a constant shadow, trailing behind me. Every time I looked at James, the love and trust one had for him felt tainted by my secret. I had betrayed him, and though I tried to ignore it, the weight of my actions kept pressing down on me. James, on the other hand, seemed unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He was the same caring, loving person he had always been. He greeted me with open arms when I returned, planning a quiet dinner at home to welcome me back. It was sweet, really, too sweet. It made me feel even worse about the lie I had told him. How could I look him in the eyes, knowing what I had done? We sat down for dinner, and James, with his usual enthusiasm, asked about my trip. I could see in his eyes that he missed me, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for what I had done. I tried to downplay the trip, telling him that it was just what I needed, a little break. I told him how beautiful the place had been and how much I had needed the time to clear my head. But as the words left my mouth, I could feel the lie hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. His face lit up with that smile, the one that always made me feel at ease, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was sensing something was off. How could he not? I was avoiding eye contact, keeping my answers vague, and I kept finding myself distracted. Every time I reached for my glass, I felt like I was betraying him again. This simple, innocent act of just being there with him. Later that evening, we cuddled on the couch, watching a movie together. The sound of his laughter filled the room, and for a moment, I almost let myself believe that everything was fine. I wanted to believe it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It wasn't even close. James leaned in to kiss me on the cheek, and I froze. His lips were soft, familiar, and I felt a pang of guilt deep in my chest. I had kissed Ethan just days before, and I couldn't stop the memory from flooding back. The heat, the passion, the intensity, it was nothing like what I had with James. It felt wrong to be here with James, knowing what I had done, and yet I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. I kept trying to push the thoughts of Ethan out of my head, but they kept creeping in. The way Ethan had kissed me, the way he had made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in so long. I wasn't looking for a way out of my relationship with James, but for a brief moment, I had given in to temptation. I had let my emotions get the best of me, and now I had to live with the consequences. The days went by, and I noticed small changes in James. He became a little more distant, his usual warmth and affection now tinged with an unspoken question. He would look at me with that concerned expression, like he was waiting for something. Waiting for me to say something, anything. But I didn't. I couldn't. How could I? How could I admit to what I had done when I wasn't even sure why I had done it? Then, one evening, the tension reached its peak. We were in the kitchen together, preparing dinner when I heard James on the phone. His voice was calm, but there was something about it that set me on edge. I couldn't make out everything he said, but the words Ethan and Trip floated through the air, and my stomach dropped. Had he found out? How much did he know? I tried to shake off the panic rising in my chest, but I couldn't. What if he had seen through my lies? What if he had put the pieces together? I stood frozen in the kitchen, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to focus on what I was doing. When James hung up the phone and walked back into the room, I didn't know how to look at him. He was acting normal, but I could feel the tension in the air. He was quiet for a while, and I tried to act like everything was fine. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, that maybe it was nothing. But then he said it. "I know you went to see Ethan," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart stopped. I turned to face him, my throat tightening. "What?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. I tried to keep my composure, but inside, I was falling apart. "I know," he repeated, his eyes not leaving mine. "I know you went to see him. And I know something happened." I felt my breath catch in my throat. How did he know? What had he figured out? For a few moments, we stood there in silence, the weight of his words hanging between us like a thick fog. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him that he was wrong, that nothing happened, that it was just a mistake. But I couldn't. The truth was right there, staring me in the face. I had no more excuses, no more lies to hide behind. I could see the hurt in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. He wasn't angry, not yet. But I could feel that everything was shifting. I could feel the trust between us slipping away, little by little. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it." James took a step back, his eyes clouded with disappointment. "I don't know what to say, Amelia. I really don't." The silence between us grew unbearable. I knew that whatever came next, it wouldn't be the same. I had broken something, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my mind. James standing there, his face a mixture of hurt and disbelief. His quiet words kept echoing in my ears. "I know." The weight of those two words was enough to crush me. The guilt gnawed at me like an unrelenting force, every minute feeling like an eternity. How had I let myself get here? I asked myself over and over again, the question swirling in my head like a storm I couldn't calm. I loved James. I had always loved him. He was kind, patient, and everything I had ever wanted in a partner. But somewhere, in the midst of all that comfort and stability, I had strayed. I had let myself be consumed by something else, something fleeting. And now, I was left with the aftermath. I tried to justify it to myself. Maybe it was just a moment of weakness. Maybe it was the pressure of everything, work, life, the routine of our relationship, that had made me crave something different. I had been so focused on finding excitement, on feeling alive again, that I didn't stop to think about the consequences. It was just a trip, just one moment of feeling something raw and passionate. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, I knew it wasn't true. I had crossed a line. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring at the phone in my hands, but not really seeing it. I couldn't bring myself to call Ethan, even though the urge to hear his voice was strong. There was a part of me that still missed him. Not in the way I missed James, though. James had always been my anchor, my calm. But Ethan, he was chaos. He was unpredictable, spontaneous. And in those moments, I had wanted that chaos more than anything. But now, in the silence of the room, the weight of my actions was unbearable. I felt like a stranger to myself. Who had I become? Was this what I wanted? To ruin everything for a fleeting thrill? Was the excitement really worth losing the trust and love that James had given me so freely? I closed my eyes, and for a brief moment, I could still see Ethan's face, the way he had looked at me when we were together. I had told myself it was just a one-time thing. That I would come back to James, that it would be forgotten. But as the days passed, it became clear that nothing could ever be the same. Not now. Not after what I had done. Every time I looked at James now, I saw the doubt in his eyes. It wasn't obvious, but it was there, beneath the surface, in the way he held himself back, the way he would hesitate before speaking to me. I couldn't blame him. I had betrayed his trust. I had lied to him, and no matter how hard I tried to justify it, I knew it would take a long time to repair what I had broken. I thought back to our relationship, the way we had started, so full of hope and dreams. We had been perfect together, or at least it had felt that way at the time. We had shared everything, our fears, our ambitions, our love. And I had ruined it. How could I expect him to just forgive me? How could I expect things to go back to the way they were? The guilt didn't let up. It sat with me in every quiet moment, like a constant companion. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I would look at James, and all I could think about was how I had hurt him. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be lied to be kept in the dark while I played games with my own emotions. I thought about all the times he had been there for me. How, no matter what, he had always been a steady presence in my life. How he had supported me when things were hard, never questioning my decisions. I had taken him for granted. I had never stopped to think about what his feelings might be, what it would do to him if he found out. I wanted to tell him everything, to apologize, to make it right. But the words were stuck in my throat, lodged there by fear. Fear that if I spoke the truth, I would lose him forever. Fear that my mistake was too big to forgive. Fear that there was no going back. I could feel the distance growing between us, inch by inch, every time we spoke or shared a quiet moment. It wasn't that we were fighting, but the love we once had felt fragile, like a cracked glass. It didn't take much to shatter it completely. And I had been the one to crack it. I tried to remind myself that I wasn't a bad person. I had made a mistake, but that didn't mean I was horrible. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something unforgivable. The weight of my actions was suffocating, and every attempt to explain them away only felt hollow. The more I reflected, the more I realized that my actions had come from a deeper place of insecurity. I had been scared that I wasn't enough, that I needed something more to feel whole. I thought a moment of passion, a spark, would fix whatever was missing. But now I saw that what I had been looking for wasn't outside of me. It was something within myself that I had to face. And facing that truth scared me more than anything else. Sitting there, in the quiet of my thoughts, I felt the enormity of what I had done. There was no escaping it. There was no undoing it. All I could do now was wait for James to process his hurt, and hope, if he could ever forgive me, that we could find a way to rebuild what I had torn apart. I could feel it in the air. The tension was thick, almost palpable. It had been building for days, weeks really. The way James had withdrawn, the way he would look at me sometimes, his eyes searching mine as if waiting for me to crack. I knew it was coming. It had to. There was no more hiding, no more pretending that everything was okay. It was that evening, after dinner, when he finally spoke. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the street outside our window. I had just finished cleaning up, the sound of plates clinking in the sink masking the anxiety that was bubbling up inside me. I could tell something was off when he stood up from the couch and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Can we talk?" His voice was steady, but there was something behind it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't even try to deny it. I knew exactly what he was about to say, but that didn't make it any easier. The words stuck in my throat as I nodded, my heart racing. We sat down across from each other, the space between us feeling miles wide. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the pain that was simmering beneath the surface. I wanted to reach out to him, to beg him to understand, but I couldn't. Not yet. not with the weight of my secret still hanging between us like a dark cloud. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But in that moment, it felt like thunder. My breath caught in my chest, and I froze. How had he found out? How had he known? The thought of him finding out about my trip with Ethan made my stomach turn. "I know what happened," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "You went away with him, didn't you?" His voice was calm, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal, the disappointment. It was all there, written in every line of his face. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him it wasn't what he thought, to explain that it was just a mistake, just one night, just one stupid decision. But I knew I couldn't. The truth was there, undeniable. I had lied to him. I had broken his trust. I started, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't explain myself, not in a way that would make sense. There was no way to make it better. Not now. James sighed, leaning back in his chair, his gaze still fixed on me. His eyes were soft, but there was a hardness there too. A realization that we couldn't go back to what we had before. I could feel it, the distance that had crept into our relationship, the cracks that had formed because of my actions. "You know, I thought I could trust you," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "I thought I knew who you were, but now," he trailed off, shaking his head. It wasn't anger in his eyes, it was something deeper, something more painful. He wasn't angry with me. He was just hurt. And that hurt was worse than any anger he could have shown. I wanted to reach out to him, to hold him, to tell him how sorry I was. But I knew that wasn't enough. Apologies weren't enough when trust had been shattered like this. The damage had already been done, and no words could fix it. "I don't even know what to say," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My chest ached, and the tears that had been threatening to spill finally broke free, sliding down my cheeks. James didn't move. He didn't comfort me. He just sat there, looking at me with a mixture of disbelief and pain. I could see the internal struggle in his eyes. He was torn between the love he had for me and the hurt I had caused him. But no matter how much he loved me, I knew it wouldn't be enough to erase what I had done. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said quietly, the words cutting through the silence like a knife. "I don't know if I can trust you again." His voice wavered slightly, but he still held himself together, even as the weight of the situation seemed to break him inside. The words hit me harder than anything else. I could feel my heart breaking, each piece crumbling away with every second that passed. The thought of losing him, of knowing that I had caused this irreparable rift between us, made me feel small, worthless even. I had ruined the one good thing in my life. "I never meant to hurt you," I said, my voice shaky. "I was just lost. I didn't know what I wanted, and I thought it would make things better. I wasn't sure if I was trying to explain myself or if I was just trying to make myself feel better. In the end, it didn't matter. Nothing I said would take back what I had done." For a long time, there was silence between us. The kind of silence that feels like it's suffocating you, pressing in from all sides. I could see the walls going up in James's mind, the protective shield he was putting up around his heart. I could feel the shift, the slow but inevitable slide toward the end of us. "I need some time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can be with you anymore." And just like that, the weight of his words crushed me. The finality in his tone left no room for hope, no room for redemption. I nodded, feeling the sting of his words settle into my chest. I had ruined everything. There was nothing left to do but wait, to face the consequences of my actions. And deep down, I knew that no matter what happened next, nothing could ever be the same again. The days that followed James's revelation were a blur. I spent most of my time in a haze, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind, searching for some kind of answer, some small hope that things might go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew it was too late. The damage was done. I had hurt him beyond repair, and no matter how many times I apologized, I couldn't erase the fact that I had lied. James moved out. He didn't say much about it, just packed his things one evening, without warning, and left. The apartment felt cold and empty after he was gone. It was like a piece of me had walked out the door with him. There was no more laughter in the halls, no more inside jokes over dinner. It was just silence now, and the weight of regret that seemed to settle in my chest every time I walked into the apartment. I tried to call him, send him messages, but he didn't respond. A few days passed, and the silence became unbearable. I wanted to fix it to make it right, but I didn't know how. How do you rebuild something when you've already torn it down? How do you earn back trust when you've shattered it in the most painful way possible? The guilt consumed me. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't go out with friends. I spent my days staring at my phone, hoping for some sign that James was ready to talk, ready to forgive. But nothing came. Then, one evening, almost a week after he left, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when I saw it. A message. From him. It was simple, just a single line, "Can we meet?" My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to think. I was terrified, yet hopeful. What did this mean? Was he ready to talk, or was this just a way to finalize everything? The uncertainty gnawed at me as I quickly typed back, "Yes, of course." "When?" He replied almost immediately, "Tomorrow. 6 p.m. The park." My mind raced. The park? Why there? It didn't make sense. But I didn't question it. I agreed, my fingers shaking as I typed my confirmation. What did this mean? Was he really ready to forgive me, or was this the final closure, the goodbye I was dreading? My mind flooded with questions, but there was only one thing I could do now: show up. The next day felt like a lifetime. I spent hours staring at the clock, willing the minutes to pass faster. My heart beat faster with every passing second. I thought about what I would say, but no word seemed good enough. I knew I couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. When 6 p.m. finally came, I drove to the park, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. The air outside was cool, the evening sun casting long shadows on the ground. I parked my car and sat there for a moment, looking around the quiet park, my mind racing. I didn't know what to expect. My breath caught in my throat when I saw him. James was standing by the fountain, his back turned to me. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me closer to him. I stopped a few feet away, waiting for him to turn around, waiting for him to acknowledge my presence. It felt like the longest moment of my life. When he finally turned to face me, there was a brief flash of something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, locked in this silent, heavy moment. Then finally he said, "I've been thinking a lot about everything." I felt a lump form in my throat. This was it. The moment where everything would either crumble completely or have the chance to be rebuilt. But before I could respond, he spoke again, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know if we can go back to how things were, but I don't know if I can let you go either." His words were like a beacon of hope and a wave of fear all at once. What did this mean? Was there still a chance for us, or was he just giving me closure? His eyes searched mine, looking for something, a sign that I could offer him the truth, that I was really sorry, that I wanted to fix what I had broken. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My mind was racing, and before I could even find the words, he said the one thing that sent a chill down my spine. "I need time. I need to figure out if I can trust you again." And just like that, everything hung in the balance. Would we be able to work through this? Could we rebuild what was lost? Or was this the end of everything we had? I didn't know. And as I stood there, with so many unsaid words hanging between us, I realized that the future of our relationship was no longer in my hands. It was up to him, up to whether he could forgive me, whether he could trust me again. The tension between us was thick, and as he turned to leave, my heart sank with the realization that I might never know the answer. Not yet. As I watched him walk away, I felt both hope and fear battling inside me. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was to come. Would we find a way back to each other, or was this the final goodbye? For now, the answer would have to wait. After everything that's happened, I'm left questioning myself. Was I wrong for seeking a moment of freedom, or did I truly destroy something that could have been saved? Was James justified in walking away, or did I deserve a second chance? I can't help but wonder, am I the villain in this story, or am I just someone who made a huge mistake? I know I hurt him, and maybe there's no going back from that, but I also wonder if forgiveness is possible when trust is broken. So, I want to hear from you. What would you do if you were in James's shoes? Could you forgive someone who made such a mistake, Or is it too late? And for anyone who's been in a similar situation, how did you rebuild trust after it was shattered? I really need to hear your thoughts, your advice. Drop a comment below, and let's talk about this. I could really use your perspective right now.